She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings and welcome back. In 2021, Covert Action magazine had an article entitled Ray McGovern, the man who got Russiagate right and tried to warn the public to no avail. It was written by James Bradley and Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov. And again, folks, that was 2021. Today, The Guardian reports Tulsi Gabbard calls for Obama to be prosecuted over 2016 election claims. Trump intelligence chief accuses ex-president and others of, quote, treasonous conspiracy, end quote, for alleging Russian interference. What in the world is going on and why? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historic context in which most of these events take place. Before we get to my guest, let's quickly look at a couple of today's headlines. Antiwar.com reports 15 more Palestinians starved to death in Gaza due to U.S.-backed Israeli blockade. Gaza's health ministry reported today that 15 more Palestinians had starved to death in over 24 hours due to the U.S.-backed Israeli blockade on the besieged territory. Among the dead were 4 children, including 6-week-old Youssef al-Safada. Babies are especially vulnerable since malnourished mothers cannot produce breast milk, and Israel is impeding the import of baby formula. What in the world is this? I guess what? They've shot as many as they think they can shoot, so now they're just going to starve the rest of the Palestinians in Gaza to death? Talk about collective punishment and war crimes. The Washington Post reports House largely grinds to a halt over Epstein files. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, and this is from the Financial Times, U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson will send members of Congress home early to avoid a vote on releasing files relating to Jeffrey Epstein, as Donald Trump's allies seek to contain a spiraling crisis. The House of Representatives is set to be in recess from Wednesday for 5 weeks, a day earlier than scheduled, and is not expected to return until September. Johnson, the House top Republican, said today that Democrats were playing, quote, political games, end quote, by trying to force votes on measures that would require the U.S. Department of Justice to release documents relating to the life and death of the disgraced financier/pedophile. The Financial Times also reports Trump left a power vacuum at the UN. China saw an opportunity. Beijing makes concerted effort to place officials and push agenda in Geneva, according to Western diplomats. China is making a concerted effort to expand its influence throughout the UN, taking advantage of Trump's disdain for multilateralism to place officials and push Beijing's agenda more aggressively, according to Western diplomats. My question is, what do you expect them to do? the United States has a history of creating power vacuums and then is surprised, shocked, and amazed when other entities, sources, and forces fill those vacuums. Again, folks, remember, nature deplores a vacuum. On today's episode, the issue before us is what we'll call Gabbygate. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has called for former President Obama and former senior U.S. national security officials to be prosecuted after accusing them of a, quote, treasonous conspiracy, end quote, intended to show that Donald Trump's 2016 presidential election win was due to Russian interference. My guest is a man who was an Army infantry intelligence officer and then served as a CIA analyst for 27 years, from the administrations of John F. Kennedy to that of George H.W. Bush. In January of 2003, he co-created Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity to expose how intelligence was being falsified to, quote, justify, end quote, war on Iraq. For years, he tried to warn the public about this Russiagate fraud, but was shut out of the mainstream media. Never shut out of this show, I'll tell you, though. Ray McGovern, as always, welcome back. Let's see where we are here. Wait a minute. We're having a little audio issue.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Ray McGovern,
Okay.
welcome back.
Thanks, Wilmer. I suppose I should explain my facial look here. Now, in the Bronx, we used to say, you should see the other guy, you know. But it wasn't really that. And I probably should recall, just to lighten things up a little bit, about 194th Street and Marion Avenue in the Bronx, there was this terrible, terrible one-on-one fist fight going on out there in the alley. Nobody could see him, except one other Irishman went in there and watched them, and they were going at it. So he waited about 3 minutes, and then finally says, sirs, is this a private quarrel, or will you let me in? Okay.
And you stepped in.
Well, I stepped into it, yeah. Actually, in all honesty, I missed my step in Oslo, Norway, a week ago. And you should see how I looked just a couple of days ago. So I escaped injury. I have to admit that when Irishmen fall on the ground, it's really good that they land on their head, because of their very thick skulls to prevent them from breaking a leg or an arm. So I feel very lucky. Sorry to take up so much time, but I do look like hell. I even try to put a little stuff on here so my Hitler little scab wouldn't show. But let's go on now. We have important things to discuss. Wilmer, thanks for having me on after all these 25 or so years we've been together.
Well, head is bloodied but unbowed. So we greatly appreciate you staying with us. And well, let me check this out. Okay, so before we get to Gabbygate, let me, and I am reluctant to bring this up, but I want to get your take. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but this Epstein issue gets bandied about, and there's one thing or two things that I think people need to keep in mind as we hear about all these goings-ons about this issue. Journalist Vicky Ward, back in 2019, wrote an article in the Daily Beast reporting that Alexander Acosta, former U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Florida and later Secretary of Labor, allegedly said to the Trump transition team, when asked if the Epstein issue would be a problem, Acosta was told to handle the Epstein case lightly because Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence, end quote, and to, quote, leave it alone, that Acosta was above his pay grade. And Vicky Ward stands by her reporting on that matter to this day. And so as someone that understands intelligence, not necessarily that type of intelligence, but how these entities operate, And then when you throw in Ghislaine Maxwell's father was allegedly Robert Maxwell was allegedly a member of the Mossad. Your thoughts on this story, and I'll leave it there, and you answer that any way you deem necessary.
Wilmer, the important word is Mossad here. This is an Israeli blackmail operation. Epstein was deep into it, and the same with Maxwell. And that's why it's so sensitive. What happened to those young girls? I mean, I have 3 daughters, okay? If that ever happened to one of my daughters, I would be up in arms. But this is awfully scurrilous behavior. How does it compare to shooting or starving Gazans by the hundreds of thousands? Well, each life is precious. So it doesn't really compare, but it fits the bill here. Now, what is interesting is that anytime Israel is involved, you have to clamp down on the list, you have to clamp down on everything, and you have to make sure that the real guy who knows all about this commits suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a break, okay, with no suicide. So, that's the scurrilous part of things. The Clintons and everybody else were involved in it. And, it really pales in significance right now, even though it's awful, with the genocide going on in Gaza, not only bombing the hell out of women and children, but starving them to death. Now, Wilmer, we've been a long time together. I come out of Ireland, and my great-great-grandfathers escaped the Great Hunger there, where there was deliberate forced starvation on 1 million people in Ireland. The ones that escaped came to New York and other places. That was my lineage. Okay, so I know a little bit about forced starvation. So don't get me started on that. All I'm saying here is that in each interview, whatever the subject, I make a point of saying that I never thought my country would be supporting, enabling, arming, and paying for forced starvation and genocide. Do not blanch before the word.
Thank you, Ray McGovern. The Guardian reports it as Tulsi Gabbard calls for Obama to be prosecuted over 2016 election claims. Trump intelligence chief accuses ex-president and others of, quote, treasonous conspiracy, end quote, for alleging Russian interference. The National Review reports it as Russiagate revisited. Gabbard urges DOJ to prosecute Obama officials. The director of national intelligence makes a frivolous argument. Do Trump intelligence officials speak with each other? Does Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, read the reports generated by the CIA? There's good reason to wonder. Ray, what's going on with this issue, and why now?
Why now is because Trump is back in power, and he in turn has empowered Tulsi Gabbard to look into how he was treated back in 2016, 2017. Now, Wilmer, as you know better than I, this is a very dicey subject, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And as I've said before, I hear my wife's warning in the back of my ear. Now, for God's sake, Ray, don't forget to tell them what you think of Donald Trump. And what I think of Donald Trump is he was the worst president in the history of our country, okay? So I hold no brief for Donald Trump. Now, what about Russiagate? Well, I do hold a brief for truth, okay? And as those spurious allegations rose up from wherever, we could see, and I say we, the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity that gathered together after Iraq, after the deliberate corruption of intelligence on Iraq, well, we had expertise that wouldn't quit, okay? And we still do. And by, we were joined by 3 NSA alumni. Okay, two of them were former technical directors at NSA. In other words, they built the networks. They know it in and out. They had their names on the bottom of these things, so to speak. And one very senior analyst. Okay, so they came to us and they said, this business about Russian hacking, my God, this is November, December of 2016, when Obama and everyone else was saying, the Russians hacked. Actually, Obama started saying this in October, exactly a month before the election. The Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee and released those emails that caused Hillary Clinton to lose. My God. So Putin owes his victory to the Russians. Okay. Putin's in Russia's pocket. Okay. So, when you have technical expertise, you turn to it. The more so if you trust them implicitly. I used to run intelligence analysis in some parts of the U.S. intelligence establishment, not just in the CIA, but in what now is the National Intelligence Directorate. And when I knew people that I could pick out of the ranks and say, look, you're going to tell me the truth on this collection platform, and you're going to tell me the truth on this other. Well, when you do that, then you are really riding high because you can rely on them to tell the truth. Well, what they told was, look, this could not have been a hack. How do we know? Well, because we built the systems, okay? And besides, we have these top secret code word graphs that Ed Snowden brought out into Hong Kong that shows exactly where the tracking parts are. So here they are. We put them in the article, okay? Mm-hmm. And besides, there's another thing you people should know, and that is there is such a thing as the law of physics. And we know with the speed at which this thing was copied, not hacked, okay? Mm-hmm. And it fits the speed at which a thumb drive can easily capture all this information. So long story short, they said this could not have been a hack. It was a copy and then a leak, okay? Somebody with access to the DNC computers put his or her little thumb drive in there, copied it from the computer, no trace of it in the ether or in the internet, okay? Put it in their pocket and took it over to Julian Assange, where he poured through it and waited until 3 days before the Democratic National Convention, and then released them. Were they damaging to Hillary Clinton? Well, yeah. What did they show? They showed that Bernie Sanders didn't have a snowball's chance in hell the way they tilted that playing field, okay? It showed that chapter and verse. So how could they get out of this? I could just see Hillary Clinton convening her brain trust like Jake Sullivan. Jake, what do you think? I got a good idea. Let's blame it on the Russians. The Russians, look, it's a twofer. We hate the Russians. We can identify Trump with Russians, and we should say that he hacked into the DNC, and that was the legend that was bruited about since October actually of 2016. Mm-hmm. Even though we put this thing out on December 12th, 2016, before Trump even became inaugurated. Did they listen to us? No. Did they think highly of the principles of physics? No. Did they want to believe this? No. And so they didn't believe it. And so we were shut out. All this expertise, all this hard work, we were just shut out of the whole thing. So that's the background of how we kind of thought that the evidence was very clear that there was no Russian hack. And just to finish up here, we'll just take it through here. On December 5th, 2017, in other words, after Trump had become inaugurated, the House Intelligence Committee got the head of CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike was the cyber firm that James Comey thought, oh, these guys are really good. We'll let them look into the forensics of the Democratic National Committee hack, right? Well, this was head by a guy named Sean Henry, who worked as the FBI's premier hacker or hack specialist for 10 years under Bob Mueller. So they got him, and he was looking into all this, and finally they got him under oath. And the first question by that fellow from, now he's a senator in California, my God, I'll remember his name in a second. He says, look, he says, Mr. Henry, can you tell us how it was exactly that the Russians hacked into the DNC emails? And Sean Henry, I said, well, it was it. And his lawyer, was saying, oh, well, Congressman.
Was that Adam Schiff?
Yeah, Adam Schiff, Congressman Schiff. Schiff. We don't
It's a pile of Schiff.
Schiff. We don't have any technical evidence that anyone hacked into the DNA. Not the Russians, not anybody else. Nobody hacked those emails. So, and Schiff said, how do you know that? Well, we have these systems that we know anything is exfiltrated, but there's other now there were a bunch of emails prepared for exfiltration, but they were never exfiltrated into the ether. What does that mean? That means that these emails by somebody with access to the DNC computers prepared these things for exfiltration and then didn't exfiltrate them, pressed a different button, copy onto this thumb drive, and that's what happened. So on the Russian hacking thing, there's great sensitivity. And I guess I should say this, I'm not supposed to say it in polite company, but, you know, if there was no Russian hacking, then how did Julian Assange get those emails? Well, if we know it was a thumb drive and taken over physical, that must have been somebody in the DNC or somebody in the intelligence apparatus that had access to the DNC computers. Or are there any suspects? Well, yeah, there's one. What do you say he's a suspect? Well, he was killed on the 10th of July.
Mark Rich.
Seth Rich.
Rich.
Yeah.
Seth Rich.
Yeah. And what happened? Well, his computers were seized immediately by the Metropolitan Police, but then 2 minutes later, the FBI said, "No, this is our case. This is a murder in Washington is a case of the FBI." Well, just to continue this thing, the FBI has been concealing the contents of Seth Rich's personal computer and his business, computer at DNC since then, since the killing. So you smell a rat? Of course you smell a rat, but there's so many rats out here. I won't adduce any more rats. You want to ask me questions, then I can, show some more rats.
Well, the first thing is we've been talking about this. You and I have been talking about this since you ran those tests, and your friend and comrade from the NSA,
Bill Binney,
and because I remember having you and Bill on right after you guys ran the tests, and the thing that always stood out to me was Bill Binney having been with the NSA. And when you start talking about defying the laws of physics, that the amount of data that was supposed to have been transmitted across the internet, that it was impossible at that time to send that amount of data in the space, that has always, that's hard to refute. It's a mathematical equation. Folks need to look at it as in the analogy of trying to send 55 gallons of water through a 2-gallon hose.
In 2 minutes.
Right. So that's the thing that's always stood out to me, is the physics behind this argument.
Well, we did a follow-up memo. The first one was December 12, 2016. And then we got new information in July of 2017. put out a memo which the Nation reporter took as a really interesting story, asked for permission to interview all of us and write a letter. His name is Patrick Lawrence, okay? So he interviewed us all, and he wrote a really good piece for the Nation, and it said what we all said. It wasn't a hack. It wasn't a Russian hack. It was something very different, and he was fired. The Nation was very protective of Hillary Clinton. They bought it. Well, I don't know if they bought it or not, but they fired Patrick Lawrence, and the editor of the Nation put a big prefatory note saying, we're investigating Mr. Lawrence's findings. There's no better journalist than Patrick Lawrence. The fact that he got cashiered for telling this story, it's on Consortium News now without the prefatory note by the editor. That's just an example of the real problem here. And the real problem is, how will Americans begin to know the shenanigans of the people in power? That's what interests me, because the media is the problem. And if people don't find out what Tulsi Gabbard has now released, chapter and verse in writing, Comey, the head of the FBI at the time, Brennan, head of the CIA, plotting, saying, look, we gotta make this the Russians' responsibility, and overturning. It was good to see that they're overturning the honest analysts who said, look, the Russians have no preference. Well, the Russians are not working to defeat Hillary, or they think they want Trump. They think they want somebody so unpredictable. For God's sake, that's the sole thing Russians look for in a president across the ocean: predictability. You think they really want Trump? So there's no evidence. It was all manufactured by John Brennan, James Comey, and the clowns that headed up the NSA at the time. And they put out this memorandum on the 6th of January, 2017. It would, which said, look, the Russians hacked the DNC to help Trump win, and he won. So really, the Hillary was defeated because of the Russians, and he's in Russia's pocket, and this is really, really bad. And by the way, this is at a meeting in the White House, January 5th now, 2017, just before Trump took office. So it's Obama, Biden, and all these gurus, Brennan from the CIA, Comey from the FBI, and the other intelligence chiefs, about 2 others. Mm-hmm. And then by prearrangement, well, actually at that meeting was decided, okay, now are we going to tell them about the information we have that prostitutes peed on him in Moscow, and we know about that, and he's a compromise and all that stuff? How are we going to use that? And Obama says, sure, let's use that. But, I tell you what, Comey, why don't you tell the president-elect that the people need to go away because you have something really, really special to tell them. And that's the way it went down. First, they told him, look, we meant to tell you before, but published today, is a memorandum that said the Russians interfered in the election to get you elected. And by the way, then Comey says, gentlemen, I have something very private to discuss with would you leave? And they leave. And then Comey looks down at Trump. Comey's 6'8", right? And he says, now, Mr. Trump, I don't know how to say this. I mean, it's very embarrassing, but today also, the press has got a hold of this scurrilous report that you were in the company of prostitutes and you let them urinate on the bed that Obama and his wife would. It's not confirmed, but it's out there. I just want, just so you know, Mr. President, just so you know. Now, here's the key point. Trump, what does he know about the ways of Washington, right? And so he spends the next couple of months trying to get Comey on his side, trying to ingratiate himself with Comey, when he should have said, Mr. Comey, thank you very much. I know this game. You get the hell out of here. clean out your desk. You're fired in 10 days. I'll give you that time. And don't show your face in Washington again, or you're gonna get arrested. I know that trick. It was all spurious stuff, paid for by the Democrats, for God's sake, and they all knew it. So when you talk about playing fast and loose with the rules and the laws and all that stuff to get Hillary elected, and then to prevent Trump from being an effective president, well, there it is. Then one other thing I'll just deduce here. After this all went down, James Comey wrote a book, or had somebody write a book, and it was a really interesting book. It was called, I think, Higher Loyalty. Higher loyalty to what? To the Constitution? No. Higher loyalty to the deep state, and personally, James Comey. Anyhow, in this book, he says, and I quote, "I was operating in an environment in which Hillary Rodham Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period." Oh, so now, Wilmer, if you're operating in that kind of environment, you could feel really free to take liberties with the law and the Constitution and make sure that she wins. And then when she wins, you get to be Attorney General, so that you stay. Oh man, it's gonna be great. But she lost. My God, they never thought. They never thought there was a chance they'd be held accountable. Now, I'll just finish this little thing with saying this is dangerous stuff for Tulsi Gabbard. She's thrown down the gauntlet. And in a way, now she has to run the gauntlet between the deep state guys, the spies, the old spies that have lots of stuff to do, and the media. And actually, they may be on either sides of this gauntlet, but they're equally powerful. Now, the media has been very, very quiet on this. After all, it exposes that those Pulitzer Prizes that the New York Times and Washington Post won for reporting on Russiagate were all based on a bunch of lies. Okay, so the media is really going to be very defensive, and I see today that CNN is starting the counterattack, saying, "Oh, this can't be," because Marco Rubio thought this. Now, Marco Rubio isn't the best source for me. Anyhow, it's joined here. Now, I'm saying this in a very serious way. This is what I'd call a liminal moment. Okay, threshold moment. Okay. Because for once, the head of national intelligence has challenged the deep state. She said weeks ago, James Comey should be in jail. My God. I said, holy Moses, I agree with you, Tulsi. You don't do these kinds of things, but you're taking on the deep state. Now she's saying Obama should be in jail. And I can tell you the proof that Obama is largely responsible for this whole thing. If you want to get into that a little later. Sometimes I talk too much because I'm Irish.
Well, let's get to that point after answering this question. Why should people now trust Tulsi Gabbard? And I'm not asking that in a subversive way to impugn her character. Because she is Donald Trump's Director of National Intelligence, which means, and I'm asking this from the perception of the public perspective. So she's an operative of Donald Trump's, and Donald Trump has spent since 2016 telling everybody the election was rigged. We shouldn't trust the election. There's blah 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 blah. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump even just dismisses the integrity of his own Director of Intelligence. So based upon what's been put in the public space, why should Americans trust Tulsi Gabbard?
Those are good questions, Wilmer. You haven't lost your feel for the trade here, and the fact that we got it right so early, I think, is because you never worked for MSNBC or CNN, or worked for.
I was seen there a few times. I wasn't there long because I kept asking questions that people didn't want to answer.
Yeah, me too. They used to have me on about twice a year, and then they stopped even that. Okay,
I,
well,
I was a regular on Lou Dobbs Tonight.
oh, were you?
Yeah, and I'm not going to go through my history with them, but
Okay.
Anyway, go
All
ahead.
right. Well, let's see now. Let me just deduce one thing that I had firsthand here. I happened to be in Atlanta on the same day that Donald Rumsfeld was making a big speech to a very privileged, wealthy, Southern, white, male-dominated, defense-oriented audience. Okay, how did I get in? From the women from The World Can't Wait got me a ticket. Cost $70, but I don't regret it. Okay, so I asked him questions afterward, and I asked him why he lied about the weapons of mass destruction, and why he lied about ties between Al Qaeda and Iraq. You'll see it. It's on the web. Now, the point I'm trying to tell, this is May 6th, I think. No, May 4th, 2006. I'm coming out of the auditorium, and I got a call. Hello, this is Anderson Cooper. Oh, hi, Anderson. Well, you're creating quite a story here, and you're live on CNN and CNN. Oh, wow. So, I want to have you on my program, but first I have to ask you a question. Sure. Weren't you afraid? I said to myself, that's a normal question. No, I wasn't afraid. And then I thought, wait a second. This guy is the heir to the Vanderbilt fortune. Right. He's getting paid $12 million a year. I mean, he's not going to be out on the streets of Atlanta with his hat out, right? So I said, look, hey, Anderson, let me tell you, it was a real high. I had done my homework. I knew what I wanted to ask them. And in the Q&A, if I was lucky to get up there, I would, and I did. And I tell you, it's a real, so you might try this. Do your homework. Ask real questions, Anderson. You'll feel just like I do tonight. He said, oh, that's very good. Well, I'll have my people contact your people. I said, no, don't do that, Anderson. Why not? Because I don't have any people. It was like, no people? Okay, well, I'll just kind of call on this phone. Yeah, okay. So I go on a program, and this is last minute. I go on a program. The first question he asked me is, Mr. McGovern, you challenged the secretary, that weren't you afraid? I felt like saying, Anderson, I told you before. Well, I said, no, I wasn't afraid. Anyhow, that's the mentality of these guys. They have to be afraid. And so these people that picked up this Russiagate stuff were either afraid or they're trying to get prominence. I don't get real prominence because I mentioned before the New York Times, Washington Post, both their Pulitzer prizes for their reporting. Completely crazy reporting. Now, getting back to what you just asked me, what was it just asked me? Let me see if I could. Was it about the media?
Well,
Must have been.
I'm going to ask. I'll restate the question to you and also pose the question to the audience.
Sure.
Based upon what has transpired with Tulsi Gabbard over the last, we'll just say 3 or 4 months.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Why should we trust what she is putting forth now, based upon she's working for Donald Trump? And I'll ask the audience, folks, what are your thoughts about the trustworthiness, the veracity of Tulsi Gabbard's statements? Go ahead, Ray McGovern.
Well, I can understand this. I've experienced it for the last 25 years. It's something called the Trump derangement syndrome.
Right?
Anyone associated with Trump, or anyone who dares to say, well, 95% of the time is saying a bunch of baloney, but he's right on this, is dismissed out of hand, okay?
Yeah.
Now, this is really important, okay? My point is this. Somebody asked me, it was a Democratic type radio guy, very much close to the Democratic Party, says, hey, Ray, why do you keep pursuing this, that there was no Russian hacking, there's no Russian hacking? Why do you do that? Can you tell me in one sentence? I said, yeah, Because Russia has nuclear weapons. That's why. Oh, 2 sentences. Oh, wait, I think I know. So here it is, Wilmer. Putin has horns, right? You can't trust him.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians are blackened to the point where they gave us Trump rather than Hillary, okay? And for 6 or 7 or 8, and now it's 9 years, Americans have been brainwashed, and I use that term advisedly, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I have family, I have friends, I have really talented people that are really good in other areas, but can't bring themselves to believe that Trump was done in by the deep state, which now Tulsi Gabbard has had the guts to prove with documents signed by Brennan, signed by Comey, and at the latest report said all kinds of whistleblowers who were forced to join in this Russiagate stuff from the CIA and from the are coming to Tulsi Gabbard and say, and guess what else,
Mm-hmm.
So it's joined here. And I really use this gauntlet expression. She's thrown out a gauntlet to the deep state. Now, that's not been done before.
Okay.
Nobody did that after John Kennedy was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And the same guys, their sons or their grandsons now, same guys that did that to John Kennedy, could do that to Tulsi in one way or another. Not just politically ostracize her, but demean her, throw her out, or even worse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's where the issue is joined. For the first time, the deep state has been confronted with documents, okay? Now, CNN and MSNBC, they're gonna not acknowledge the authenticity of these documents, but documents are documents. Sworn testimony or sworn perjury are right on the record. So will Tulsi Gabbard be able to achieve her aim, and that is hold people accountable? Well, I just have to tell you, I admire her for doing this, but I have to realize that everyone should realize that the odds are really against her. And to the degree that people are interested enough to look at the documents, and I implore you, just look at a couple of those documents, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Don't dismiss it because she works for Trump. She does work for Trump. I hold no brief for Trump, for God's sake, okay? But to the degree that these documents show what happened, if these guys are not held accountable, and I have Obama right in mind there, then it's going to be a case where the deep state wins every single time, even when a gutsy woman tries to hold them to account. And, so that's why I implore you people to look into it. Don't dismiss it as one of Trump's people. Well, she is, but she was unique. I'm surprised that she took this on. She did take it on. She's I know her. I briefed her when she was a congressperson, okay? She's smarter than hell, okay? She asks the right questions. And she's got guts that won't quit. So don't dismiss her, for God's sake. Don't say just because she works for Trump, she's beyond the pale. She's doing something unique, for God's sake. I support her in this. I don't support her in everything on Gaza and Israel. All that stuff doesn't. But you can. I guess my message is you can discriminate. Okay, you don't have to say Trump is wrong 100% of the time. And this has implications. If the Russians and Trump, which I think is the case, Putin and Trump both want to put an end to this damn thing in Ukraine. Okay, I believe it never would have started if we didn't have that crazy Biden. Now I was a lifelong Democrat. Let me put it this way: when I was young, I asked my father. I said, what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? And he said, it's very easy. The Democrats, like Franklin Roosevelt, our president, care about the poor. Oh, is that why? Yeah, that's right. He cared, and so, well, that's no longer the case. So, I was a Democrat. Now I'm an independent, but I care very much about justice. I care about the orphan, the widow, and the refugee, and that's why I could never vote for a person like what we have in power now. But the bottom line here is Ukraine. Now, if people can continue to be brainwashed, that that Russia's attack on Ukraine was unprovoked, full scale, and illegal, then there's no help for us, because the first two of those are demonstrably untrue. And the third one about illegality, that's not fixed law. And I have that from, Richard Falk, who wrote the book, okay? So it wasn't unprovoked. The U.S. provoked it, and that's on the record. The head of the NATO said, look, this was Jens Stoltenberg. Most people don't know this, but he told the EU Parliament 2 years ago, he said, Putin said we have this treaty. You signed the treaty and no Ukraine in NATO. And if you keep trying to get Ukraine in NATO, we will have to invade, says Putin. And so he didn't want an expanded NATO. And so he said, no. And so he invaded Ukraine. But we got Finland and we got Sweden, so we got an expanded NATO anyway. 1 million Ukrainian young kids have been killed by that time. My God, we should have any humanity left in them. So that's the way it went down. The Russians said, "Look, what you're doing in Ukraine is unacceptable. You're about to invade the Donbass. We know that. You've upped the artillery bombardments in the first week of February by a factor of 10. Okay, so we're going in. Now, do I like the fact that the borders of Ukraine were violated by Russia? No. Do I say it was unprovoked? Of course it was, because no, it wasn't unprovoked. It was provoked up the gazoo, so to speak.
And Lil Marco told us it was a proxy war.
Well, yeah, Marco slips every now and then.
But let's quickly, because we're up against the clock, and I want to be sure you get an opportunity to explain former President Obama's involvement in the allegations that Tulsi Gabbard has put forward.
Okay. Let's do a chronology. This is on the final exam, so audience, get out your pencils and paper. 12th of June, 2016, Julian Assange announces he has emails relating to Hillary Clinton pending publication. Long story short, they're published 3 days before the Democratic National Convention on the 22nd of July, okay? All hell breaks loose. And as I depicted before, Hillary decides to blame it on the Russians to kind of disengage, to disappear the notion that anything was really under. So anyhow, she had a PR person named Jennifer Palmieri, okay? She goes around, she says, I run a golf cart peddling this Russian hacking and Russian interference, and she couldn't get any buyers. She goes back to Brooklyn, the headquarters, Hillary's headquarters, and then she says, finally, we got journalists like David Sanger, journalists from the Times and the Post, and then intelligence people came to us and they told us about the Russian hacking and all this stuff, but still we needed more. And finally, on October 7th, we had a joint statement from James Clapper, the head of National Intelligence, and Jay Johnson, the head of Homeland Security. Yes, the Russians hacked up the kazoo. Now, Jay Johnson, who has a conscience and is married to a Catholic, and has commented, I'm glad I'm not a Catholic, because then I don't have to go to confession. He's talking about his rulings on who you could drone kill for death and all that kind of stuff. So he says, so what he says in his testimony or in his emails, Jay Johnson, he says, this came up in court. Obama was so interested in getting us going on this, and we couldn't wait for the forensics. We couldn't wait for CrowdStrike to come up with the results of the forensics that James Comey gave CrowdStrike. Okay. So, look, Clapper and Jay Johnson, I want you to put that thing out now. before you have any forensics. So Jay Johnson is saying this, for God's sake. That's how it happened. So that was the 7th of October. I think the election was the 9th of November, right? So they had all these weeks to weave this tale about the Russians. Obama threw out 35 Russian diplomats because of their hacking, right?
Mm-hmm.
He confiscated Russian diplomatic territory in the United States, all because of the hack. And this will get you. At the very end, 2 days before Obama left office, okay, he was asked, what about this Russian hacking? The only thing that we don't know is how those emails got to Julian Assange. Huh? What? Now, Obama's a lawyer, okay? He's covering his rear end here. And he says 2 days before he leaves, it would be good to know. We don't know how. Now, I asked Clapper that in 2018 at a Carnegie incident. I said, now, how do you explain that? I mean, you said was, great confidence and only here the president saying he doesn't know how it got to you. How do you explain it? Well, I don't know. I can't answer for what the president said. No. But, since I mentioned Clapper, if we have one more minute, at that same meeting, he's flecking his book, right? Book about his experience. And so as I usually did, I got the book before, half hour before, went into the men's room. What does he say about Iraq? Well, he was in charge of imagery analysis on Iraq before the war. So I turned to that page, and what did it say? Well, this is not a happy thing to relate, but Vice President Cheney was working really hard to get us to find weapons of mass destruction. And so we identified 35 or 53 suspect sites, but then we really couldn't find any weapons. So, and I take personal responsibility. So we found things that weren't really there. Period. And quote. So we found things that weren't really there. Mm-hmm. So I said to him, well, is this a repeat performance? How about Russian hacking? Did you find things that aren't really there? No. We had the NSA. We looked. I said, well, we have technical directors from NSA in our group, and they show that it couldn't have been hacked. Wow. And then the head of the Carnegie, whatever it is, institution, his name was William Burns. Mm-hmm. Later, they become head of the CIA. He said, no, Mr. McGovern, we have to close this off here now. But, and Clapper wasn't even red-faced. He put it in his book. He wasn't even ashamed of it, of finding things that weren't really there, for God's sake. So that's the kind of leadership you've had in the intelligence community. And he, of course, was director of national intelligence. Tulsi Gabbard is a horse of a different color. She should be supported on this. Don't believe all the people that got Pulitzer Prizes for lying about all this crap. It really matters, because if the deep state is not held to account now, it never will be, and will be living under even worse than the rest of the stuff that Trump does.
So final question for you on this for now, and that is, what do you project will come from this?
It all depends on the media.
Okay.
This is, the media is the cornerstone of what people believe. If CNN, MSNBC,
if they continue to pursue this the way they're pursuing Epstein, then
there's been a big silence on the part of the Times and the Washington Post, as far as I can say, and the Wall Street Journal. But I do notice that CNN now is, and MSNBC can be expected to. So, people have been brainwashed, and that has had a really deleterious effect on our security, because Russia has been an object of hatred. Russophobia reigns supreme. Mm-hmm. So this is important because, as I said before, we have to discriminate. There's Dr. Jekyll, and most of us Mr. Hyde, but Dr. Jekyll says, let's do Ukraine, for God's sake. Let's prevent the need to unconditional surrender. Putin is flexible enough to paint this pig of defeat for NATO and US with enough lipstick to do it. And that's the reality here. The reality, and I'm an outlier in saying this, but I've been at this for 6 decades, for God's sake. They are both putting priority on creating the kind of decent relationship between our two countries that Trump was prevented from doing during his first term because of Russiagate.
Wow. Well, Ray McGovern, as always, glad you're doing well. And again, y'all should see the other guy. Really appreciate it, Ray. And we will stay with you on this as this continues to unfold.
Thanks, Wilmer. I know I can depend on you, and I hope your audience takes an active interest in this. It's not hard to do. I have a website. It's called raymcgovern.com, and it's easily searchable. And if I forget to mention that, then my son, who runs the website, gets really angry at me. So I'm glad I thought to mention
it. If folks take nothing else away from this conversation than the following, then I think they will take away something incredibly valuable. And that is, you just said, take a look at the documents. Read the documents. That's all you got to do. And then you may read the documents and say, Ray is crazy as a bedbug. Well, okay. Or you may read the documents and go, there might be something there worth discussing. Read the documents. That's all you got to do. Ray McGovern, again, my brother. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Folks, as always, got to thank Ray for joining me today. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. Dr. Radhika Desai will be joining us tomorrow. So stay tuned. Really looking forward to a great conversation with her. And I got a message that that Laith Maroof may be in trouble. And so I was, during some points of the show, trying to make contact with him. To date, I have not been able to. The issue is that he has been detained. The story is that he has been detained by Lebanon police and possibly the Lebanon intelligence. I've called him, no answer. I've sent him a text message, no response. And Laith usually responds to me immediately, even if the response is, I can't respond. So I've reached out also to Dimitri Laskarius, who I believe interviewed his brother. And so I'm going to try to get Dimitri up. And so, folks, let us pray for Laith Maroof. And I'm going to spend a good bit of time now seeing if I can actually find out exactly where he is and what is going on with my dear brother. So with that, please follow and subscribe to the show, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. The talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Dr. Radhika Desai will be my guest. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.